Hey everyone, and welcome back. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me for this explainer today, because we are diving straight into the deep end of a true masterpiece, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Now, we aren't just going to recap the surface level plot here. Oh no, we are stripping this narrative right down to the studs to understand the profound architecture of human suffering and existence that it was actually built upon. To kick things off, just picture this. Dark, contemplative idea from the 19th century German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. Imagine a group of animals freezing in the dead of winter. They desperately crave warmth, right? But physically they just cannot get close to one another without causing agonizing pain with their quills. This haunting little image? This is the beating heart of the world we're about to explore. So, that leads us to a really provocative question. Why does a giant robot show feel so profoundly depressing? I mean, if you came to this material expecting your standard triumphant, rah-rah sci-fi story, you probably realized pretty quickly that your expectations were being totally subverted. Because at its core, Evangelion isn't really about giant robots punching aliens. It's a deep, unflinching look at human suffering, isolation, and what it literally means to exist.
Which brings us to Section 1, the creator's depression.
To really understand this, we have to look at the mind behind it. The series creator Hideaki Anno was suffering from severe clinical depression in the early 1990s. He was questioning his life's direction, feeling entirely disconnected from the world, and apparently even considered walking away from animation altogether. But instead of hiding that dark mental state, Anno did something completely revolutionary. He used his own therapy experiences and his deepest, darkest anxieties as the creative fuel for this narrative. He just poured his unvarnished psychological reality directly onto the screen. And in doing so, Anno completely upended the entire mecha genre. Usually these stories give you triumphant heroes and thrilling action spectacles, right? But Anno prioritized emotional truth over action. He gave us reluctant pilots, traumatized kids like our protagonist Shinji Ikari, who is damaged, frightened, and just drowning in internal psychological struggles. This was definitely not about heroic empowerment. It was about the crushing weight of reality. Moving on to Section 2, the Hedgehog's Dilemma. So the Hedgehog's Dilemma, which links right back to that Schopenhauer quote we started with, is the anchoring metaphor for the entire series. It's this psychological concept where human intimacy intrinsically involves the danger of being hurt. We all crave connection, but because getting close invariably causes pain, we withdraw. It's fascinating, actually. Sigmund Freud was super interested in this idea, and it's explicitly referenced by characters like Ritsuko and Misato to explain exactly why Shinji is so terrified of taking risks with other people. Masato Katsuragi really hits the nail on the head here. She perfectly captures how the characters in this story are constantly wavering. They desperately seek out the warmth of relationships, but they're utterly terrified of the inevitable pain of each other's emotional spines. So what do? They push each other away, they isolate, and then they suffer from the freezing cold of that isolation. It's a vicious and honestly a very human cycle. Let's dive into Section 3, a philosophical cast. Now here is where things get absolutely wild. The brilliant thing about Evangelion is that these aren't just angsty fictional teens. They are physical embodiments of complex philosophical concepts. What we are basically watching is a massive group drama of philosophy. You've got Shinji representing Sartrean existence, Asuka reflecting Levinian ethics, Rei as a Lacanian fantasy. It's a world where abstract ideas about freedom, desire, and the death of God literally collide. Let's just zoom in on Shinji and Asuka for a second. Shinji is burdened by Sartrean freedom. He is condemned to choose, carrying the agonizing responsibility of his own existence. He has to decide whether to pilot the Eva, and that choice is just crushing him. Asuka, on the other hand, represents Levinesian fear. She is absolutely terrified of being objectified and judged by others. So she uses aggression, pride, and sarcasm as a shield to ethically reject the gaze of everyone else out of pure fear. Which brings us to this incredibly famous quote from Sartre. Hell is other people. Man, does that statement encapsulate Asuka's crippling isolation and really the painful friction of the whole Hedgehog's Dilemma we've been talking about. Being seen, being defined by others, is a literal form of suffering for these characters. And yet, being entirely alone is just as unbearable. This leads us right into Section 4, the temptation of escapism. So if reality and relationships are this painful, what's the natural human response? You run away. In the series, this ultimate desire to escape manifests as the Human Instrumentality Project. This is the literal attempt to dissolve all individual boundaries. to basically melt everyone down and merge humanity into a single shared consciousness. It is driven entirely by a profound fear of pain. After all, if there are no individuals, there's no other around to hurt you, right? But as our sources point out, it's a completely false solution. It's essentially seeking to communalize death and wipe out the individual entirely. So the narrative leaves us with an incredibly stark choice. Do you choose the pain of individuality, the friction, the loneliness, establishing yourself through the harsh reality of your own mortality? Or do you choose the numb comfort of escapism, floating in warm LCL fluid, sharing minds with absolutely zero boundaries? Well, at the climax of the original theatrical version, Asuka delivers this visually jarring, famous line. She just looks and says, "How disgusting," or "kimochi warui."
Why on earth does she say this? Well, it's actually a profound ethical choice. It is a total, unapologetic refusal of a world where everything dissolves together into nothingness. By expressing disgust, Asuka is reclaiming her individuality. She is reclaiming her boundaries. She's making this incredibly brave, incredibly difficult decision to accept the suffering and the incompleteness of living alongside other people, rather than just checking out and accepting the numb comfort of a collective soup.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, Choosing Painful Reality.
So how does this massive dialectical conflict finally resolve? If we pull back and look at the franchise as a whole, we see an evolution that maps perfectly onto modern philosophy. First, Shinji attempts to establish an individual ego. That whole Descartes, "I think, therefore I am" phase. Then he hits step 2, the total crisis and collapse of that existence, passing right through a nihilistic abyss. And finally, step 3. He reaches a Hegelian kind of reconciliation. He actually communicates with his father, integrating all those opposing viewpoints into a higher understanding. And honestly, the coolest part is how this brilliantly illustrates the creator's own journey. The reconstruction films totally mirror Hideaki Onno's personal recovery from depression. In that final film, Shinji chooses to create a world without Evangelions. He literally dismantles the fiction. It's like a modern retelling of stepping out of Plato's cave, leaving the shadows of fiction behind and stepping into the bright, messy light of the real world. Onno is directly telling his fans to find their own closure, and please don't replace real, lived experiences with an obsession over fiction. You know the line. Throughout the series, Shinji constantly repeats his famous mantra, "I mustn't run away." But when we look at it through this philosophical lens, we suddenly realize this isn't just a battle cry for a kid trying to be brave and a robot. It is the ultimate existentialist maxim of the entire story. It represents an ethics of thought. What Evangelion is ultimately teaching us is that disgust, pain, loneliness, and the friction of relationships, these aren't things we should try to magically escape from. They are actually the starting point of philosophy. Accepting the incomprehensible discomfort of existence is exactly what quickens our thoughts. It's what makes human connection, as flawed and as prickly as it might be, truly, deeply meaningful.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I've got to leave you with this to think about. Knowing the inevitable pain of human connection, will you choose the sweet, numb comfort of escapism? Or will you bravely step into the painful but profoundly beautiful reality of the Hedgehog's dilemma? Thank you so much for exploring this absolute masterpiece with me today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you in the next explainer.